Hey everybody, it's Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show, bringing you our guest, Donnelly Wilkes, who is an author and also a medical doctor. So when Donnelly first joined the military, joined the Navy in a time during school when really was no opportunity to do anything other than go on a ship and be a doctor for a few months at a time, and then come back and be like, hey, medical school's paid for, pretty good deal. Got to serve my country, got to honor the traditions of the family and all those kind of things. Well, funny thing happens. The day he gets his doctor code, he's also sworn into the Navy, and they're like, now pack your bags. You're going to Fallujah in 2004. Oh my goodness. What does this mean? Well, this means that the Marines are going to go get into a big old fight in pretty much the nastiest area in all of Iraq. And they wanted to push doctors as far forward as possible. Now, in this case today, because Donnelly wasn't even really fully done with his training, I'm not sure he's a doctor, but he still had a lot more stuff to go learn before he could be really ready to deploy today. But in 2004, it was like, grab your gear and go. The front lines are waiting. And so they would do these rotations where they would push forward to what's called a forward aid station. So that means they are within earshot of the battle. They can hear the Humvee fire up and drive towards them and see it come. I mean, they're that close to the battle. And that means you're getting mortared, have all of these things happening, and you're dealing with people that are, in some cases, in case of the Marines, are so severely injured, they're already dead by the time they arrive. And Dr. Donnelly talks clearly about it. I went to his house, got a chance to do a show, finally, face-to-face with him. His book is called Code Red Fallujah. The link are in the show notes. You can find that stuff there. And I know you're really going to enjoy this episode. A couple things to talk about real quick. The Ride for the Brave is coming up. What? That's right. It's already been just about a year, and we're going to get back out on the road. This time, Scott and I are bringing a little bit of help because it was a lot of work last year. And I'm actually not doing the whole thing. I'm going to go as far as Dallas, and then I've got some other things to work on. A lot of big stuff coming up the next month. You're going to see a little less of me on the day-to-day stuff. Once we take off for the Ride for the Brave, I probably won't go live at all for that whole week. And then I'm going to go camping and take a total week off. And then I'm going to go on a road trip, and I'm going to grab some shows in Arizona and Texas, and then Chris Thomas King and a whole bunch of other stuff in August. So I'm going to get on the road and go do that. You guys are making that possible by supporting the show. It doesn't put me up in comfortable hotels at night, but it does get me out there, buys gas. It helps me get equipment that I can make myself more mobile. And so this is part of what you all have been doing when you're hitting that PayPal link. If you're like, hey, what's Pete talking about? How do I support Pete? Go to breakitdownshow.com, grab that PayPal link. Tell me you need it. Email me. I will send it to you. That PayPal link is my version of Patreon. We don't need Patreon between us to take a piece of the pie. Listen, whatever it is that you want to do, a monthly thing is super helpful because then I can use that money and I can budget in, right? So if you do $5 a month, $25 a month, $100, whatever it's going to be, I'm going to put that money right back into this show. It's going to put me on the road. That's what we're talking about. That's what you do to get old Pedro on the road. So if you want to support the show, breakitdownshow.com, grab the PayPal link and do what you think is best. And if you're also into the charity side, same thing applies for Save the Brave. Go to Save the Brave, go to the Donate tab and click there. We are going to be on the road. So when you put that money in, it's buying gas to keep the van moving across the country, allowing us to take and go out and see people and watch the magic of what happens once we get on the road and people show up and they're desperate to help. And you're like, well, we're here and we need help. And it's in terms of finance and everything else. You can also share the posts that we put up. We have all kinds of beautiful things coming. You're going to love it. Great videos, great images. Share that stuff. That lifts up the overall Save the Brave message. And one other thing you can do is just to say, hey, Pete, how can I help? We'll find something for you to do. Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. That's how you can help with that. All right, here comes Donnelly Wilkes. Enjoy.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summit.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Donnelly Wilkes, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
I'm live at Donnelly's house. He lives in a wonderful little community, and I love to get out here and go live. Put the sun on my face. I'm going to try to find a shadier spot. But the main thing is we've got Dr. Donnelly Wilkes on the show. He was in the Navy, deployed with the Marines in Fallujah in 2004, which was a nasty time to be in a very hard and nasty place. And we were both in the military before there was going to be like a 9/11 fight. You know, we all got a chance to go out and do things like go on a Caribbean float or a trans-Pacific kind of mission. And then someone flew a plane into a building, and it changed everything for guys like us. And we were drawn into this combat situation, which is crazy. Not all that uncommon for a guy like me who's, a counterintelligence guy, a spy, but for a doctor, it's a totally different thing. So the guy talking to us today has written a book called Code Red Fallujah, and it's about his time as not only a doctor in a cache or in some kind of aid station, but forward deployed, 5 minutes from the fight. And so that's who we're going to talk to you today. So here comes Donnelly. Donnelly, when I ask you about being a doctor in a combat zone, how do you describe it?
It was wild. That's one word. It was wild. It was extreme. The environment over there is extreme. I think that's probably the biggest difference from practicing medicine and providing care is just the environment that you're doing it in. And we can get into a little bit more of those details. The medicine, combat medicine, is vastly different because you have to just rely on your innate skills that you brought to the theater with you, and you just don't have the tools that you have in a normal emergency room setting. So that was a challenge.
When you deploy, I don't want to say just barely a doctor, but you're just barely a doctor. You're not even are you fully licensed? You're not full through all your training yet, right? I mean, that's part of the thing.
You're right.
Yeah.
That's one of the main differences between civilian medicine and military medicine. Physicians, after 1 year of internship, can be plucked from residency training and sent to active duty commitments. And that's what happened for me. All other civilian residencies are at least 3 years before you can practice independently. So yeah, in many aspects, I was a baby doctor.
When you think about that now, looking back as a full-fledged doctor with many years of experience, is that crazy or is that the right thing for some? I mean, look, you got to be crazy to go to a combat zone anyhow. And then even crazier to forward push out to, you are part of the fight. The fight comes to you every day. You talk about it constantly, being mortared, being rocketed, guys coming in. Like you can hear them fire up the Humvee. You can hear the firefight. You're that close to it. Does it take a young person who's crazy to do that kind of work?
I think so. Crazy could be, one word, but it's organized chaos. One quote in the book I wrote when I was trying to think of how do I describe what I'm doing here practicing combat medicine. I said it's like ballet with a pole. And it really is, because there's so many things that you just can't control, and you have to learn to move with it and work within it to be able to practice, the skills that you have. So it's wild, but I had the tools, I had the confidence, and the military did prepare me well. So despite the challenges, I think like many military members, we rise to the occasion.
The military does prepare you well. They're good at that, but there are a lot of things that just aren't on the list because there's just not enough time to prepare you all the way.
Yeah.
We talked about the different sounds of combat, so you can translate what's happening, where things are going. Are you in danger? Are they in danger? Whatever it is. But there's also just the, they can do like the fake injury stuff and you walk up and you're like, this person needs an IV, but that is not someone who's been hit by shrapnel. And you're trying to figure out which wound is important. Are there wounds you're not seeing? You're trying to put all this together in real time. Yes, you're a doctor, but you're not that kind of doctor yet.
That's right. Yeah. Nothing can, you can train and go through scenarios like you said, which we did. And that was one of the, the amazing parts about being embedded with a Marine Corps battalion. We went out on, night raids at Camp Pendleton, preparing for what combat might be like. I went with the Marines, in attack mode, wearing night vision goggles and taking care of roulage patients. We went out to Texas and spent 3 days in the field practicing combat casualty care. Lots of fun, and also really putting us to a level of elite combat medics. And that's what we had to be to prepare ourselves to operate in an environment like Fallujah.
What is the difference between a combat medic and a doctor? Because you definitely have a higher grade of education and training, but they have very specific skills. So how would you liken that?
The main difference would just be the environment that you train in and the combat casualty scenarios that you go through. So you're doing field care, and you're providing that care in an environment that you typically don't see. So, for example, we had to do some procedures in the field. When I say in the field, we were underneath a freeway overpass, a few hundred yards from the front lines in Fallujah. Men are coming to us with severe wounds, head wounds, blast wounds, gunshot wounds, an RPG canoed through a Marine's shoulder. And you need to be able to stabilize these men and sometimes perform surgical field procedures. So you need to put a chest tube in, under the freeway, and you're on the ground and it's 110 degrees and there's a dust storm and mortars just dropped behind you. And you've got to keep your composure and take care of that Marine, stabilize them, and get them to the next level of care.
We got to spend some time here in this, because all of the factors that you just talked about in combat, they multiply so much. Like there's a qualifying position that you fire in a lot of times to certify to go, and you have to lay on the ground, lift your head up and shoot. When you put all of your gear on, for me, it's physically impossible. I just don't have the neck shape to do that. And so I have to try to get my body up in some kind of crazy way. I would never shoot this way in actual combat, but they don't care about that. I would literally, if I had to do that, I would lay on my back, instead of your front, because there's just no way to do it. So when you bend down to put an IV into somebody, you've got a Kevlar on, you've got body armor on, and it doesn't move like you want it to. And so you're trying to do that, and it's 115. And I don't know, what would you estimate the temperature is inside those plates? All of those things. Talk about some of those things that are exasperating and make your job harder.
Yeah, I talk about that in the book. And actually, I took some painstaking time and detail to talk about the Kevlar sitting on my chest, breathing heavy, sweat dripping down my brow, the Kevlar helmet, the weight that it has on your neck when you're trying to work. Because all those elements add to just the extreme environment that you're working in. And then you've got fellow Marines around you, rooting for their fallen brother. You want to show them that you're going to do everything you can for them every time. And so adding all those elements in, it weighs on you. And there's an emotional component to it. I talk about that in the book. Some times where I had to, really dig deep, ask some serious questions about my place to God and some struggles I was having. And I get into those in the book.
I want to get into the faith stuff for sure in a little bit, but I want to stay in the actual challenge of combat. And I also want to say we had it teed up that Eddie Wright was going to join us. Eddie was in Fallujah in the fights there. He's a Marine and caught an RPG in his hands, and it blew his hands off from the elbow down, right? Yeah. So he's got two hooks. And we were going to talk about that experience from his point of view, because you didn't lay your hands on him, but someone did, and people were really getting hurt. I mean, every injury is significant. If you take a bunch of small shrapnel and it's just some stitches and some butterflies, you've been injured in combat, and if you come in and you've had an RPG shoot into your thing, that's not something that they can just have fake wounds and they can do all of that. But when they're brought in and their fellow Marines are keyed up, trying to make sure that you save their friend's life, and they're trying to do everything they can, and now it's all on you, that's a different thing. It's a different agreement that happens there, whether it's a minor scratch or they've been shot through and through some muscle and they're going to stitch them up and they'll be back at work in 2 weeks or whatever, or it's a life-altering injury, and that's if they're alive. Talk about sorting that out, because it is real to put your hands on someone and then not be alone and realize that you are performing this in a way that will matter tomorrow and the next day and the next day for these guys.
That's right. And, I think that was one of the elements to providing field care that really hit me. And that is, being that far forward deployed in normal, emergency room settings and hospital settings, you have consultation from other physicians, from nurses, from great skilled technicians. And in our case, it was just myself and another physician, Lieutenant O'Connor. He and I would trade places at the Cloverleaf, taking shifts as the battle surged. And so besides my corpsman, I was on my own, no one to consult. And that left me feeling very alone at times. But, some people have asked me, how do you maintain your composure? How do you remember the skill set or the procedure or how to do it when the S hits the fan, so to speak. And I was trying to describe that. And the best way I can describe is that, you've got this little file drawer of skills and things that you've learned and situations that you've been in. And you access that file drawer when the time comes. You pull out that card and you just go to work because it's there. You've got the skill. You've been put in the scenarios to test you. And the military did that well. And you access that card and you go to work. And I think that's the best way I can describe it for myself when it came time to operating in an extreme situation.
One of the parts of the book that you bring up, and it's really powerful, is basically, I think it's the first casualty KIA that comes, and the person's the person is dead when they get to you. But again, you have to perform this life-saving maneuver, this almost a performance, because although because you're a doctor that this person's dead, he was alive 5 minutes ago to his friends who brought him in.
Yeah, and to be specific, if we're talking about Lieutenant Jackson, which is a fictitious name, I had to change some names to protect the identity of some of the fallen. He had what we'll call a mortal head wound, yet he was still breathing on his own, and so it was a rough situation. By all accounts, he should have been dead, and I was just really asking, good Lord, how is this man alive? Why is he alive? Should we even attempt anything? Because his semblance of any normalcy would have been horribly dim if we saved him. The answer took seconds. His fellow Marines are looking on, and we knew we had to show them we'll do everything every time. So we proceed with all-out efforts to try to save him. And despite our best attempts, he does pass away right there as we're working on him under the clover leaf. And kind of instinctively, we're gathered around him in a circle. We just link arms, and I lead a prayer over him. The battle's still happening in the background. His Marines are gathered around. There happened to be an AP, Associated Press photographer, who had been dropped off there. I didn't even know it. He snapped a picture. It became, a Pulitzer Prize-winning photo of that moment. And we said a prayer for courage and strength and the will to go on in the fight. And then we got up off our knees and kept going to work. And that embodies the Marines and the Navy corpsmen and the spirit that we brought to that battle.
I'm going to pull that image up here so everybody can see it, because it is important that we understand, these are real people, and you're inventing things on the fly. And what you guys are looking at, that's the Pulitzer Prize winning moment, and the legs that are straight out is in this case, fictitiously named Lieutenant Jackson. But again, to these guys, a few minutes ago, their friend, their fellow warrior was alive, and it's on Donnelly to figure out how to reckon with this, and also make sure that the next time they throw someone in the back of a Humvee and bring them, that they know that Donnelly's an asset. And that's it's so crazy, man, because you would think that they would train you on what you do in this case, because triaging somebody and saying, hey, they're dead is one thing if they're on a helicopter on a live flight, or, you're just in the cache and there's no one else around. But those guys are going right back. Those guys are going right back out to go fight.
Right back in the fight. Yep. And man, that's the spirit of the American military. I love that part of our history, and it's what we do. And there's time to show emotion, and I'm balancing that with leading the prayer and knowing that I want to take a moment to recognize that our fallen brother. And at the next moment, I know we got to get ready for the next casualty that's going to be brought in right behind them. And so I think I learned some leadership skills that way. You can't teach those. They come to you. And I feel blessed and, honored I was able to be a part of it and grow from it. And it certainly made me a better physician, husband, human, having to go through those kind of things.
How long is that deployment between rest for you when you get to go back and do it? And it's not fair to call it R&R because you're still working and you're still in combat zone, but you're not on the tip of the spear. You're on the edge of the tip of the spear. But how long were those times when you were the forward doctor before you rotated back? And then also, what's the pace of work? Because I know when everything happens, it's different. And then I want to talk about time in a minute, but how long are you forward deployed? Yeah. And then what's the pace of work?
Our forward operating base was at the time called Camp Mercury. That was just a few miles outside Fallujah. We convoyed from Kuwait for 3 days to get to that base, which was wild. And there's a chapter in the book about that convoy, because it was like heading into an ancient land. And we would, when the battle in Fallujah started, we pushed forward from the FOB, the forward operating base, to the Cloverleaf, where we made our field aid station. So Lieutenant O'Connor and I would rotate every few days, and it just depended on how the surge of the battle was going. We'd rotate out of the Cloverleaf back to the FOB to take 24 hours, get a shower, get a hot meal. But I tell you what, we were getting mortared at our forward operating base. In fact, there's a chapter I get back and I'm talking about just trying to decompress from being at the Cloverleaf. And I hit the end button on a movie I'm watching. And as that happens, this ungodly hiss from above me just crashes my entire world. It's a rocket. They hit inside the camp, which is a small little target. First time of the whole deployment, they hit a rocket right on the money and knocked me off my chair. So that's deployment life. And combat life, which I learned to understand, is just this animal. You never know what's going to fall on you, and you're just living at this 10 out of 10 level, the entire time. You don't even know it sometimes that you're living at that 10 out of 10. And anyways, to answer your question, it was every few days we'd rotate back and forth from the front lines, my front line at the Cloverleaf to the forward base.
What's the thought process there? Is it because it's so stressful for you guys? Because, and again, this is for the audience. Donnelly doesn't have any control over anything. His patients show up when they show up. There's people trying to mortar and kill them. There's always a threat of sniper fire or whatever. I mean, there's all these constant threats. And wherever you walk, you're aware of, like, where do I need to go if something happens right now and right now and right now? So every one of those. So it's an enormous stress, but you're not in the fight. And so in some ways, your job is harder because you don't have control. It's constant. Someone else is always doing something that can bring you a patient. Is that the idea behind the several day rotations, or is it to spread the work around? Because the combat guys are going out every day. That's and right. How do you balance that part?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for the rotation. And before I talk about that was certainly the unique part for me as a Navy physician. And one of the reasons I wrote the story Code Red Fallujah, because it just happened to be, the most violent event of the 10-year Iraq War, the Battle of Fallujah. Physicians haven't been as close to urban combat, urban warfare in quite some time, maybe since Vietnam, as we just happened to be, and I was there. So it was an important event in history, and just a unique time for Navy medicine. From the forward base, the Marines were still carrying on other operations in other parts of the province, the Al Anbar province. So the Battle of Fallujah was one front, and then we still had Marines out in Ramadi. So we needed a doctor at the base to take care of casualties that would come back to the base. And then the other main reason was just rotating men in and out to give them time to, decompress, because it was pretty intense at the Cloverleaf. It was a few weeks of nonstop casualty care, 24/7. Men could come in anytime, day or night. And a lot of action was at the Cloverleaf. It was the main artery into Fallujah. Amphibious assault vehicles, tanks, men, weapons, ambulances, all going through that position. So it was just a hotbed of activity. And we'd rotate out corpsmen and myself and the other doctor.
The day-to-day work, you've got to mentor corpsmen, lead whoever's there with you, ensure the preparedness of your aid station. All of these things require constant attention. Oh, and then, by the way, here comes someone. You got to blow the whole world up trying to get this person taken care of. And then it's like, okay, everybody clean everything up, resupply, get ready. And I would imagine sometimes before you even finish that, the next patient is being brought in. It's like that fast. And then I imagine it's like, now what am I going to do? There's nothing to do for hours because it's downtime. And you're trying to turn your, I'm laughing because it's so, I've been there. Yeah. You try to turn your brain off and just try to do something and not think about what's about to happen, even if it's because you can go crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, managing the downtime, and even you could call it the boredom at times, is one of the challenges of deployment life. not so much boredom when we were at the Cloverleaf, but the downtime was tough. And you're right. Sometimes we'd get communication from a platoon commander that wounded Marines coming in. Other times out of nowhere. And, I talk about that in the book. And sometimes it's not even a Marine. It's a wounded Iraqi. We had some civilians brought there. One Iraqi came running out of an ambulance. He had a piece of his face severed off. He had been injured in the fight. He was a civilian. We had to calm him down and get him to an Iraqi hospital. And a couple times, there's a chapter in the book I had to take care of some wounded insurgents who had been shot up in the fight. We captured them. They had to come through the Cloverleaf, and I had to inspect their wounds and get them back to a detention center. So you just never knew it was going to show up.
There's that famous story of that medic who's in a firefight. And when I say medic, everybody's kind of a medic of some sort these days in the military. But he gets shot in the plate by an Iraqi, and then they return fire and they hit that guy. And the Iraqi who shoots the guy he shoots saves his life. So he goes and acts as a medic. That is a crazy thing when you have this. That's why I call them co-belligerents, because we're not necessarily fighting to dominate and kill the other side and grab the commander's sword and flag. We're trying to figure some other way to do this. And we are required. Like I've been on a raid where you go through the door and anything alive is a threat and it's going to likely get shot. You try to do your best to sort, but the baseline is anybody in this house is going to die. And until someone calls all clear, you're completely lethally focused. The moment that all clear is sounded, you go into aid mode, in my case, intel collection mode. But, the person who's the second before throwing rounds at people is literally trying to save the people's lives who are in this building. It's crazy. Does that even make sense from a doctor point of view?
It's hard to make sense of some of those things. And, I made it my goal to, understand my mission, and that I'm a Navy physician, Marines first, Corpsman first, everything else second. And it gets complicated. I'm there as a healer, yet I carry a weapon. I'm in a combat zone. I'm getting mortared and rockets sent. I know people want to kill me. They'll use our Red Crescent as a target if they could. That's why we put them down. And so I want to fight back, but I can't. That's not my role. I'd use my weapon if I had to, but I'm there as a healer. So yeah, difficult to sort some of these things out. But I think that's the beauty of the United States military. We we respect to the Geneva Convention and the rules of war. And the insurgency could have cared less about those things. So you're in this environment where you're a target. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a non-combatant. And we held ourselves to a higher standard.
One of my favorite parts of the book is you talk about this dichotomy is you get sworn in with the Hippocratic Oath or whatever they officially call the doctor's oath, and then the next thing you do is you raise your hand, you go into the room and you raise your right hand, you swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. It is this, it's like you're a hypocrite.
Yeah, and I love that part about my service, military service in general. You've got a number of different professionals that you might typically think of as of opportunity, right? Doctors, lawyers, nurses, all these people in the military that have put on the uniform and put themselves in harm's way. And you'd mentioned the dichotomy there, and you're right. After we had our graduation at Tulane, all the other students went off to start having a party in New Orleans, where I graduated from, and the military students, there was about 10 of us, were escorted into a private room, and an officer walks in, and we have to read the oath, salute, and sign on the dotted line, and we've committed. And that's the beauty of America, service. I love it.
Grab that book and hold it up next to you so everybody can see. We're talking with Dr. Donnelly. There you go, Donnelly Wilkes, and his book is called Codename Fallujah. You can see the link on the page. Go to Amazon, click on that, and that will give us a little bit of a taste of when you buy the book. The book is fantastic. It's short. It's easy to read, and no one's written anything like this for a long time. I mean, the story of a doctor. We think about MASH, and I don't want to get into the MASH cash kind of story in life and everything, but this is an important tale, and this just happened. Okay, granted, it's been 17 years or so now, but these things normally don't ever get written, and you've done it in a way that is completely accessible. And I definitely recommend the book to everybody who wants to understand it. One of the things that also you talk about, and we all kind of get to it, but I don't know that anybody's nailed it yet, is, okay, so you're there and you're a Navy doc. So you're sort of in the military, but it's a totally different kind of military than what you're doing, and then you were a guy in Tulane who's loving living in Louisiana and all these other things. And now, I mean, you talk about it, it's completely foreign to what you thought the path was going to be. All of that is a lot to deal with. Now you have to manage the love of your life, being back at home, and we have the ability to communicate immediately with our loved ones when we're deployed. A lot of people don't do it for whatever reason, but you have to filter. I mean, I remember talking to my friend Dennis, right? Again, 2004. And I would type, and I'd say, boom, boom. Every time I heard something blow up, us or them, boom, nonstop, boom. So you can get a feel for how violent this place was, And so talk a little bit about how you manage that with your loved ones as you try to relate to them what you're experiencing, but also not add to their struggle.
Yeah, when I signed up for the Navy, it was pre 9/11, and there was no brochure for urban combat in Fallujah.
Yes.
So 9/11 was my fourth year of medical school. That's when the Twin Towers came down. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew on that day that my military service would change forever. And, within a year and a half, it certainly did. And although I'd signed up for a life in the military, again, nothing can prepare you for, deployments, and certainly a combat deployment. So I had this idyllic, picture of what my military service might be like, duty on a ship, maybe go overseas, things like that.
Yeah.
And so my world was just rocked, when I found myself headed towards the Middle East. And then, oh my gosh, I just happened to be in the Battle of Fallujah, and it's one of the most violent events. I didn't know the gravity of it at that time, but I knew that I was in a bad place.
Yeah.
And I struggled with, at times, that juxtaposition. How did I end up in this place? Asking God some serious questions about that. How do I talk to this about my fiance back at home?
Yeah.
Although there's a twist on the book in that. How do I explain this to my loved ones? And while I was there, I decided that I couldn't explain it. I knew that it was something that you had to be there, had to see it and feel it to fully understand it. And so I kept that part to myself for a while, I think, to protect myself and my loved ones back at home until I was ready to talk about it.
My buddy Dave did the almost exact same thing as you. Heck, you may even know him. His name's Dave Nita. He just retired, and he deployed. He's like, I got this sweet deal. Military's going to pay for my medical school, and he did. And he was in for years and years and years. But then they're like, hey, by the way, and again, this is a Navy guy, right? So you're not thinking you're going to be on the ground in Afghanistan, but there you are. So he goes and he does a PRT tour, which can be cake, or it can be very, very dangerous because you might have to go out on missions all the time, or you might be doing something different. You just don't know what you're going to get. How do you reconcile your life with these kind of uncertainties? And it turns out you go back to combat. I mean, you go back again. How do you reconcile that uncertainty and put yourself in that position? I mean, it seems like you could say, I'm just not going to do that and find some other tour and do something else rather than go back to Ramadi or Fallujah again.
Yeah, I went back in 2008, and that was the origins of my book, Red Fallujah. I took my field journal on my second deployment because when I got the call to go again back to Iraq, emotions were stirred. I've got to talk to my wife and tell her that we're going to be separated for another 10 months at least type thing, and it was tough, especially since my commanding officer had just said I was probably going to be fine, staying home, and then got the call to go. So it was tough, but I knew that was the life I had signed up for, and I knew what to expect this time going back to Iraq. So I took that field journal and I started writing, and it became therapeutic to be able to put my thoughts on paper on that second deployment, sitting in the Middle East, looking at the desert again. So that was therapeutic. That helped me get through. And then beyond that, reconciling with where I was, what I was doing, and how I was going to get through. In the end, I gave it up to the good Lord, and it was a journey to get there. It didn't happen overnight, but ultimately I knew it was where I was supposed to be. I knew it was where I was meant to be, and where God needed me, and that's how I got through it.
I want to get into the faith aspect next, but I want to kind of close out some of this day-to-day life stuff. I've worked with a lot of, when I go somewhere, because I'm an outsider usually with that unit, I've got to go make friends. And I for sure go to the cash or with the aid station or whatever the medical element is there. And you make friends with them because, I need friends. And I don't have enough people that who know who I am. And I don't, I'm going to get carried in. I'm just going to be some guy. And that's not how I want to be if something happens. So, and doctors are good people to hang out with. They're very funny and everything. Caches and mashes are not, they don't have mashes anymore, but caches and these aid stations can often be, if it's a quieter area, it can be a little raucous. It can be, there's quite a bit of, they make hospital dramas for a reason, right? So it's funny. And I should say, when I was in Missoula in 2004, I was on the camp. It was a cluster camp that had that bomb go off in the chow hall, but they had a suicide bomber. And I knew the doctors well there, and they all came over and said, we've been really well behaved and haven't done anything wrong. But today's a day when we are going to do, we had some drinks. And it was a day when you needed drinks because not only did they blow the chow hall up, they purposely targeted the hospital during triage. So they were bringing all these bodies, and I think it's still the biggest camp bomb that happened during any of the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. It was significant. And so there's all these people laying around, dying, dead, injured badly. And then the secondary attack comes. And that's just a lot on a doctor to deal with that. And I don't know how it was where you were, but yeah, you said earlier, they targeted the hospital all the time. I mean, they were intense originally. Can you imagine? This is for the audience, because I know you can. Let's talk about it. But you're in a tent and people are launching mortars and rockets at you. And when a bomb goes off like that, you can be a quarter mile away and still get hit by something. Granted, unlucky if it happens, but that metal is still going. It's going fast. So talk a little bit about just your experience, like how different it can be when you're on a camp, but still, if that's the day, then that's the day and things go crazy.
Yeah, you're right. It's a day in the life. I remember leave the base to go out on some missions with the Marines at times. There's a couple chapters on that. And you felt like, okay, I'm leaving home base, leaving my safety net, so to speak. You're in a Humvee. Sometimes, we're in the back of a Humvee and not a lot of up armor at that time.
Right.
But you're going out into what felt like the Wild West. And you're taking your skills with you and your coat of arms with you. And, you've got your Marines around you to go on a mission. And that's your lot in life. And you get through it. And then you get back home. You feel like you can decompress a little bit. But then to your point, just when you might unwind a little bit, boom, some mortars land. And, fortunately, they weren't extremely accurate with their mortars, but they'd hit close sometimes, and in our camp sometimes. And one time, blew up a Humvee in a tent right in our camp. And even if they don't directly impact near you or you don't get shrapnel, just the concussive blast and the mental torment is intense. It takes its toll. And you do that for 30, 60, 180 days. And you don't realize, but it takes its toll on you. And it takes time for that to de-escalate when you come back home. So you learn how to deal with it while you're there. You're in survival mode, fight or flight mode. Everybody does it in their own way. And you also, of course, you laugh it off with your fellow guys. You just get mortared. And after you kind of get through okay, we're all good. Then you sit around and try to have a laugh, and tell stories about what you're going to do when you get back home.
Yeah, and not every camp has hardened sites where you have concrete above your head. A vast majority of places that you live in are temporary. If they're tents, sometimes they're just literally like foam and aluminum sandwiched together.
With some cement barriers around the sides.
Yeah, and you accept that if the rocket lands inside my little square of sandbags, I'm dead. And how many times did the rocket come in and land where, I know you have it in your book, I've got stories of it, where the rocket lands and it blows up, but luckily everybody was out at work. Right. Or they happened to all be at the chow hall. I mean, there was one where the rocket went right between two living containers, and you're like, God, if anybody had been in there, it could be 8 people in there. If they had been in there, they'd all be dead.
Yeah, and you had to accept it. And I remember when we first got there, just a couple of days in, we had arrived to our base, and we started getting mortared. And I took one of the Marine Corps officers aside, Mike Butler, and I said, What's going on, man? How are they getting so close so quick? We just got here. And this guy's a hardened warrior, and he says, you don't think they saw a convoy of 50 trucks rolling in? They know what's happening here. They know where their target's at.
Yeah.
And, they just roll out in the desert in little trucks with makeshift mortar and rocket launchers, and they fire them off and scurry away. And I said, Mike, how come we can't, get those guys when they do that? He said, hey, we're trying. We're setting up perimeters. We're going to launch counter artillery, but there's no way you're going to get them all. It's a game of numbers, and that's what you have to deal with.
There's also and this isn't necessarily the Marine way to do it, but there's also like your reserve units, and they don't want to get into trouble. And literally, like, I see your guard says, hey, I see someone setting up a mortar tube. Yep. Are you sure? Well, continue to monitor. No, they're setting it up and they're getting the mortars out now of the truck. Continue to monitor. Okay, they've launched. Continue to monitor, because they didn't want to take, for whatever reason, that chance to re-engage. You talked about counter battery. The counter battery for the audience is they shoot at us, we shoot right back at them. We all do math. We all know how to do it. And even that is limited. You're like, let's do counter battery. Well, we can't because they did it from a neighborhood, and that neighborhood isn't all full of bad people. And so I've been on interdiction patrols where we go out with a platoon, and you literally walk through town, all around town, so that if anything happens, you're there to respond and also to keep them from doing it. And yet they still find a way to do it because you're pretty easy to see. It's maddening. And I wonder, as dangerous as all that stuff is, and as maddening as all the mortaring is, were you eager to get off the camp and go experience it firsthand, face to face, outside of I'm doing quoted fingers, safety of the camp?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I was partly curious, partly just, I wanted to be part of the band of brothers, going out and doing something meaningful. And I knew my main job was to be where I needed to be to take care of injured Marines. But there were many weeks where, they needed me out in the field to go liaison at the hospital, or I talk about an operation we did in Ramadi where we had to arrest some corrupt Iraqi Civil Defense Corps police that they were training. So I went on that mission. We got mortared, of course, and it was just wild. So yeah, I did. I wanted to go out and be a part of the action.
Part of what you have to overcome is that you're not a Marine. You're in the Navy, you're a doctor, and so you're in a lot of ways barely in the military to the Marines, right? Which is no way a knock on what you're doing, but that's how they look. These are young 18-year-old guys that are like, I came here to blow shit up, And you're like, I'm a doctor, So when did you have to stop acting like you were, something that you weren't? When were you comfortable with the rhythm of combat and have the confidence? Because you can go work in an emergency room and see a lot of similar wounds and everything. Maybe the speed is faster, but at some point you get your stride and you don't have to puff your chest out because you've done it. You've got the bona fides.
I think I hit my stride midway at the Cloverleaf, a couple weeks in. And, I was fortunate enough to meet some great Marine Corps officers. And you're right, it's kind of like this club, this tribe. They're military, Marine Corps officers. And so I'm a Navy physician, and they know I come from a different path, different training. But they knew real quickly that, I was their brother. And they treated me like that and indoctrinated me. And so at the Cloverleaf, Phil Treglia, he comes in from Fallujah. He's battle torn. He's got grease on his face, and he just comes up. We do a high, fist shake, chest bump, and he's like, "How are you, brother?" And I remember thinking, Phil, how can you look this good? How can you even seem excited? You just came from the battle, and it just hit me. He is in his element. Yeah, he is just in his wheelhouse, and he's a warrior, and he's meant to be there. And he fired me up, and I felt the same way. I knew I was meant to be there, and I knew I was going to be okay and get through.
And you probably were at that point before you realized it.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
How long do you think until your peers realized? And when I say peers, I mean the brothers, the warriors that are out there. How long until they realized that you were up to the grade?
I think once we rolled out of the forward operating base out in the field into Ramadi, and then of course into Fallujah, they say there's no atheists in foxholes, and what I experienced is once the S hits the fan, bullets start flying, mortars dropping. It doesn't matter where you came from, your background, your color, shape, size, so to speak. You're just all in it together, and you feel this camaraderie, this commitment, this desire just to work with that person next to you, because that's all that matters, is to get the mission done and survive it. And so everything about where you came from goes out the door. And as soon as we rolled out of the forward base, that's when, I think I felt that brotherhood.
I love it. Yeah. These are things that you and I could talk about because we've been there. And that, like, when I ask you questions about, like, I say you're barely in the military, it's not in any way to denigrate. I'm trying to give the point of view of those Marines, because I had to do the same thing. I'm this middle-aged man. I'm a DA civilian. Nobody cares about that. They don't go like, yeah, you're a civilian. The C part is where I stopped paying attention. And so I had to earn their trust. One of the things I would do was, if I went to a remote camp, I'd bring a big old barrel of ice cream under my arm. And I'd be like, I'm Pete, I brought ice cream. Because, again, they don't know me, right? And I had to earn their trust. And I could tell them. I remember this one kid, he was an E5, newly promoted, and they brought him out because he was on a different camp. And they're like, hey, we got to get away from your friends. Let's get you into a leadership role. And he was trying to, like, bow up and, like, be a big combat guy. And I'm like, hey, man, I got more combat time than you've got in the entire Army. So I've got more me. He's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, go ask somebody. And I don't have to do this dance, but you have to understand that sometimes you have to, and most guys didn't do that. I'm sure you might have seen guys who challenge you, but then they get squared away on this thing. But It's funny how there is this dance that you have to get through. And a lot of it you've got to do for yourself, to convince yourself of that. I want to get into the faith part of what you do, because it's such a powerful part of your book. And it's clear that you lean on the Lord and your faith to get you through these challenges. And I would imagine it changes who you are even to this day, that realizing that the faith is there, that you aren't alone, and you have this support around you, but sure can't see it, sure can't talk to it directly. And it's easy to forget that it's there. And I would imagine that even though you've made that leap, you often have to remake that leap, because it's easy to forget that leap has been made and that you have given all this stuff up.
Yeah, you're right. In the book, I talk about how, I came from a Catholic background, in, Christianity, growing up, and all those kinds of things were part of my upbringing. And then I talk about how I go into medical school and join the Navy, and, those things go by the wayside a little bit. And then, of course, you get into an intense environment, combat, and you start leaning on those things again. And initially, I was challenged at how I ended up in this position, and why me, God, asking some serious questions. And I want the reader to know, and everybody know, that's okay to do that. It's okay with God that you do that. Ask questions. You can have doubts. It's important with what you do with it. And so for me, there's a chapter in the book where I just talk about how it all came full circle for me one night, asking those serious questions, figuring out what do I do in this moment to get me through, because there was this weight on my shoulders that I knew I just needed to release to help get through the rest of deployment and even understand why and where and how did I come to this place. And I did that. And I was, blessed to be able to reach deep, give it up to God, release some of these fears I had, and it helped me, sustain through the deployment.
Yeah, we all do it differently. When I looked at it, I had to accept, because our camp was extremely dangerous. We got mortared all the time, which, as you know, like it's no big deal until it's the big deal, and so you are in danger constantly. And then I go off camp all the time, and I had to just accept that all of it's out of my control. And it is providence at the wheel, and you don't get to tell war. You can be great. I'm great at war. I'm great at it, but you don't get to decide when that moment happens. And so you really have to give it up. And one of the things that I built for myself to change my mindset, because I had like certain, especially in that war, because they were trying to snatch us, right? And so if you came within a certain circle, it was lethal time. Anything outside of that, high-fiving and drinking shots and doing whatever to make friends out in the villages. But when I put that right foot down outside of the camp, when I first got into theater and I put my right foot down or my left foot down, on the ground, I would look down and go, okay, I'm here. This is my situation. And now these rules go in. The other rules, like living in California or Chicago or Las Vegas, all those rules are over now. This is combat time. And this is maybe combat time light because we're on a camp. But then now I'm off the camp. It's a completely different thing. There's someone hunting you, and there's a threat everywhere. And you're not in control of all of these things. All you can focus on is what your job is. And for you, that's doctoring. For me, that's asking questions and getting to know people and giving the commander the information they need to win to make the area safer for everybody. Is that still part of your faith now? Like, how hard do you have to lean on faith? This is a whole lot easier around here where we're sitting.
Yeah, that's been a question I've been asked a number of times. What's that transition like? Coming from practicing medicine in the Navy and in a combat environment, and then civilian life, and isn't it boring or that kind of thing? And one of the things I talk about is that, and this is a common theme amongst veterans, you develop such a sense of accomplishment and pride, and that you're this warrior when you're in the military and doing these extreme things, and then you come back to civilian life, and how do you find that same sense of purpose? A lot of veterans talk about how it's tough for them to find that same sense of self-worth and purpose outside of the military. And that in some cases that even escalates, elements of combat stress and PTSD and things like that. I went through some of that. So I've experienced that, and finding that purpose again took me a little while to make that transition coming out of the military after my service. But I'm so thankful that, I've been able to reconcile the demons and take away the good. And I do feel, such a sense of pride and accomplishment, and just really lucky and blessed to be able to tell the story, bring it to others, and, hopefully even help others in their journey.
How many other doctors like you are there that were right there on the tip of the spear? There's a whole lot of doctors that, and this is not a knock on any of them, but they have a much easier time. They're at a battalion or brigade aid station. They're at a cache. They're not doing what you did. How many people like you from that Iraqi era would you say are there? How many doctors went through that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, I don't know those exact numbers,
sure.
But there was probably only a handful that were in the extreme forward deployed positions and subject to the indirect fire. I'm very proud the Marine Corps awarded me a Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V, and I think I realized how important that was when I was interviewed by a Marine Corps Staff Sergeant, and his paraphrase was, "When I saw you were given a Combat V, I said, what the, is that, I wasn't even aware a doctor, would get one of those." So of course I was very honored by that, and I'm very proud of it. So there's probably just a handful. Of course, Lieutenant Cormac O'Connor, my brother, he's one of them. And there's a few that I know, and that even were, in more harm's way than I was. And at all times, the Marines were in more harm's way. So it was a unique part for what I did, but man, everybody was in harm's way out there, and I just happened to be there. And, one thing you mentioned earlier about making friends and, one of my favorite friends that I made, plural, was some of the special ops guys, because I found out they wanted to be my friend, which is pretty cool. They'd come by the battalion aid station and say, "Hey, Doc, come over here." And of course, these special ops guys, their training in field combat care is pretty good, but they wanted some, better skills. So they took me out to, the weapons range, when we're deployed, and they, we tossed grenades and we shot sniper rifles. Yes. And it was not just American special ops. It was Aussies and the Poles and the Brits. And I just love that part of our history, that since, the Great War and World War II, the freedom fighters of the world are coming together for a common mission. And they were out there, and it was really special meeting those guys and working with them.
Yeah, for sure. And then also like, "Hey, I need an IV bag." And you're like, "Take it," but we always need an IV bag because we're, it's just, you always need them, and they're not easy to come by. It's always good to be able to support one another. Because we were in Iraq at the same time, I want to give you the opportunity to ask me any questions, because obviously it's not common that you get two people that have such a common experience. Even though we did totally different jobs, everything, we know what that time was like. I mean, I was in Iraq when those 4 contractors got hung from the bridge, and we all knew the game changed that day. And I remember when General Mattis his Marines were wiping out bad people. And then we had to pause, and I'm like, that's bad because, I understand there are a lot of dead people to get off the streets and stuff, but they gave the initiative up. So what questions do you want to ask me?
You mentioned the Blackwater contractors, that died, and that was one of the nidus or the stimulus for understanding that we had to respond and go into Fallujah and attack the insurgency. And I always wondered what it was like to be a contractor because, we talked about how you're part of this band, this group, and I'm a kind of an ancillary provider. I'm not necessarily an infantryman. And so I'm along for the ride, but an integral part of the ride. And I felt security, though, that I'm in this battalion of 1,000 guys who are completely mobile and weaponized. And I felt that security around me. What was it like to be a contractor moving in and out of some of those elements is really what I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, and at that time I was a contractor, so it's the perfect question. And we had people going back and forth to Fallujah, people going back and forth to Abu Ghraib, and I was at Baghdad at that time, and we were waiting to deploy. And I knew we were going to go to Mosul, but no one was in a big hurry to send us up there. It was like, oh, why don't you guys get in your Toyota Land Cruiser and just attach onto a convoy and just drive on up? And we're like, no. For anybody understanding, Iraq is the size of Texas, and they're saying basically drive the distance of Houston to Dallas, but take 12 hours to do it, and be exposed in a car that's a car. You're going to be in a car. So
Toyota truck.
Yeah, a Toyota truck, right? And it let me realize that, one, the initiative was on us. Nobody cared. We had already met the contract requirements, right? By just being in theater and having the job title that we had. And if the Army wanted to move us, the Army could move us. But until they did, we weren't going to push the initiative. But the reality is they don't have the resources. We're up in Mosul. Like when we showed up, the intel assets in that camp completely changed for a long time after that because we knew how to run operations and they had really no seasoned assets. They had a bunch of folks that were shake and bake trained, like, hey, here's your 2-week course, via video teleconference. And so we had to get up there. We didn't know all that going in, but we knew that we were going to be helpful and we had to deploy ourselves. So we didn't want to drive because that was needlessly risky. 2, again, we would be latching on to somebody else's patrol, which is not anywhere near control enough. Also, if you put your vehicle on a train, which you could do, and have it rail headed up or flown up in the back of some, C-130 or, C-17, you lose control of that vehicle too. And it'll get stolen. And that's 100% true. So what we did was we went over to C3 Air, which is the operations for the people listening, it's operations for air assets. And we said, hey, we need the task 2 Chinooks to take 2 teams up with our Land Cruisers and all our gear. And the guy's like, yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, all we had to do was ask. And that taught me the biggest lesson was that just because I'm a contractor and I don't have to do anything, I can literally put a 0 on my performance sheet every day. I didn't do anything because I was there. That was going to be good enough. And that for me wasn't ever going to be good enough because there's an actual fight going on and people needed our help. But that was the biggest thing that I took from all of that time was that this was a serious fight. And if I didn't get myself into it, I couldn't help. They needed my help, and they would provision me. So we would go to the commander when we got to places and be like, we're here to help. And we're going to take some resources, but for the most part, we're going to give you information. And I started learning how to communicate and how to operate basically on April 5th. I was like,
and
this is a different game.
You're just learning on the fly.
Totally.
I remember, and that's war.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, man, this is truly the Wild West. On our convoy, we'd stop at, I call them outposts, spots along the way where you're going to refuel, get more ammo, weapons, people on board and off board the convoy. And then you roll on out into the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And, some of our vehicles had up armor and some of them didn't.
Right.
And it was vastly different from that first deployment to the second. In 2008, we had, the MRAP vehicles and huge up armor, better Kevlar.
Yeah.
But on the first deployment, we had none of that. And I remember thinking, man, okay, this is wild. I thought I have a little bit more than this.
Yeah.
But that's war. That's the military. And some of those things, the military is learning as you go and adjusting as you go. And it's wild.
people often mock Donald Rumsfeld for saying, you don't fight with the army you want, you fight with the army you got. And he's 100% right.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't know. We had to go out and do it. When I deployed, I saw a Humvee for the intel asset there, and it had the bumper number from my unit that I was in Germany. And it still had the people's names from 7 years earlier. You know, I guess, let me think. I was in Germany in 94, 95, 96. And so in 2004, a vehicle from my old unit with people that I knew, their names were still in it. That's how unprepared we were. We were just like, bring it, it's in Germany, put it on a train and send it on down, you know?
That's right.
It's crazy.
And just like the war effort of, World War II, it takes a little time to ramp up and get people in motion and produce new gear and get it employed and get it, out to the field. Even, in military medicine, when they look at historical, most common causes of death in the battlefield, not a whole lot's changed from, World War I and II. There's certainly more advanced equipment we had, but the basic elements of, field combat death hadn't changed much. And so I studied those things and used that history to determine how I would take care of the men in theater.
And with that said, we've had several dead people on the show. Mike Day was shot 27 times in a gunfight, walked off the battlefield. Died on the airplane. They brought him back. Just incredible. Yeah. We had Josh Montz on the show, dead for 15 minutes. Totally normal dude. I mean, by the way, dead for 15 minutes, not 100% service connected on his disability. So I was like, wait, he died in a combat fight, and he's not 100% automatic. Like, that should just be automatic. And then we had a cop that had 5th degree burns and survived.
Just literally unbelievable.
Yeah, he got hit from behind. Nothing malice, just like an accident. But he was on fire. They had just brought him out because we got to get that guy out. And they brought him out and realized he was alive. 5th degree burns. Yeah. Yeah, it's insane. So we have advanced a long way. But you're right. A lot of it is the same. If you can get him to stop bleeding,
that's right.
We're better at tourniquets now.
Yep. Support the airway and then get him to the next level of care.
Yeah. Well, listen, hold that book up one more time. Everybody, Code Red Fallujah from Dr. Donnelly Wilkes. Nice and high. And there's the link right there. Man, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's such a great tale. It's so neat. Anything in closing?
Just a shout out to the service members, men and women of the red, white, and blue. You're the fabric. And you helped me understand the true meaning of service. I'm blessed to have been a part of it, and I love you for it.